The room had been locked for years, not by chains or alarms, but by silence. Lisa Marie Presley stood alone in the back wing of Graceland, where the tours never went, where the air smelled faintly of old paper, cedarwood, and something time itself had given up trying to erase. This was not a dramatic search, not a planned uncovering. It began the way most truths do, quietly, almost by accident. She had come looking for something ordinary: family records, old photographs, fragments of a life her father had lived before the world claimed him completely. What she found instead felt like the house itself had been holding its breath, waiting for her to arrive. The cabinet was narrow, built into the wall behind a false panel, its hinge stiff from disuse. Inside were folders, envelopes, and a small wooden box wrapped in yellowing cloth. Nothing about it announced its importance, and yet the moment she touched it, Lisa Marie felt the unmistakable weight of intention. These were not forgotten things. These were hidden. She sat on the floor, as she always had when she was a child wandering Graceland after midnight, legs folded, the house around her listening. The box resisted slightly before opening, as if even now it was unsure whether it should reveal what it carried. Inside were letters, not many, enough to matter. Cream-colored pages, thin but well-preserved, folded with care, tied once with a faded ribbon. There were no labels, no dates written boldly on the front, only handwriting, elegant, slanted, unmistakably personal. Lisa Marie did not need to read the names to understand that these letters were never meant to be found by anyone outside the person who wrote them and the man who kept them. Her father had guarded many things in his life, but this felt different. This felt deliberate. The first letter trembled slightly in her hands as she unfolded it. The ink had softened with age, but the words remained sharp, emotionally intact, like they had been waiting. The opening line was not formal, not guarded. It was intimate in a way that made her pause before continuing, as if reading further might cross a line even time itself had respected. And then she saw the signature: Marilyn. No last name needed, no explanation offered, just Marilyn, written smaller than the rest of the page, almost as if the writer did not want the name to draw attention to itself. For a long moment, Lisa Marie could not breathe. The world knew Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe as legends who orbited the same cultural sun, but history had always kept them at a distance from one another, parallel icons, never intersecting. And yet here was proof, not of rumor, not of speculation, but of communication. Private, emotional, real. She read slowly, the way one reads something that can never be unread. The letter was not dramatic in tone. There were no grand declarations, no scandalous confessions in the first paragraphs. Instead, there was vulnerability. Marilyn wrote about exhaustion, about being seen and yet never known, about rooms full of people where she felt utterly alone. She wrote about the noise of fame and the quiet fear that followed her when the applause ended. And woven carefully through the lines was something else: trust. A sense that whoever received this letter understood her in a way few others ever had. Lisa Marie felt an unexpected tightening in her chest, not jealousy or shock, but recognition. She knew that loneliness. She had inherited it. As she reached the second letter, the tone shifted. The words became more urgent, more fragmented. Marilyn wrote as if time itself was slipping, as if she was afraid that if she did not say these things now, she never would. There were references to conversations, to moments shared away from cameras, moments the world never documented, still fundamentally unseen. Lisa Marie stopped reading halfway through the page. The realization settled slowly, heavily. These letters were not harmless. They were not souvenirs. They were confessions. And confessions, once revealed, have consequences. Her mind drifted to her father as she had known him, and as she had not. Elvis Presley was a public figure frozen in time for the world, but for her, he had always been something more complicated, a presence both overwhelming and distant, a man whose love was real, but whose life was crowded with ghosts no one else could see. She wondered when he had read these letters, where he had been sitting, what expression had crossed his face as he folded them back into their envelopes. Had he intended to answer? Had he wanted to protect Marilyn, or himself, or both? And perhaps most haunting of all, why had he chosen to keep them hidden for so long? The final letter in the stack was shorter. Its paper was creased more deeply, as if it had been folded and unfolded many times. The handwriting wavered slightly, betraying a hand under strain. Lisa Marie read the first line and felt the room tilt. Marilyn wrote of fear, of feeling watched, of not knowing whom to trust. And then, without warning, the letter moved into something darker, a quiet admission, a truth she had apparently shared with no one else. The words were careful, almost coded, but their meaning was unmistakable. It was a confession not about love, but about survival, about the cost of being Marilyn Monroe. Lisa Marie lowered the page and stared at the wall across from her, the portraits of her father looking back with expressions chosen by photographers, by history. None of them showed this side of him. None of them hinted at the responsibility he had carried in silence. She understood then why these letters had been hidden. Not to erase Marilyn, not to deny the connection, but to protect something fragile and unfinished. To keep the world from consuming yet another truth before it was ready to be understood. The house was still silent, but the silence had changed. It no longer felt empty. It felt charged, as if the past had shifted and was waiting to see what she would do next. Lisa Marie carefully refolded the letters, returning them to the box, though now she knew they would never truly rest again. The discovery had already altered the shape of her understanding, not just of her father, but of the legends the world thought it knew. These letters were not just artifacts. They were a doorway, and once opened, there would be no closing it with consequence. The story, long buried behind fame and myth, had finally found its way into the light. Lisa Marie did not leave the room immediately. She stayed seated on the floor long after the box was closed, as if standing up too quickly might shatter something delicate that had just come into focus.
The idea that Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe shared a private emotional world felt unreal, not because it was impossible, but because history had never allowed its space to exist. The world prefers its legends separated, neatly packaged, their stories simplified into headlines and photographs. Elvis was the king, Marilyn the dream. They belonged to everyone, and therefore to no one. Yet the letters suggested something far more human. Two people recognizing the same fracture in one another, a shared exhaustion that fame could not cure. Lisa Marie knew enough about her father's life to understand that he rarely trusted easily. That made the letters heavier. Trust for Elvis had always been expensive. She began again, rereading the first letter with new attention. Between Marilyn's words were small details that only someone truly listening would remember. She referenced a conversation late at night, a phone call that lasted longer than intended, a shared joke about how silence could sometimes be louder than a crowd. None of it sounded like a fantasy or flirtation designed for drama. It sounded lived in, familiar. Lisa Marie felt the slow realization that these letters were not about romance in the way the public would imagine it. They were about recognition, about being seen without performance. That, more than anything, explained why her father had kept them. In a life defined by noise, this had been quiet. History had always danced around the idea of Elvis and Marilyn as parallel myths, icons rising and falling in the same cultural moment, symbols of American desire and vulnerability. But official timelines rarely intersected them in any meaningful way. They moved through the same industry, attended overlapping events, and were discussed in the same breath by journalists, yet their personal worlds were kept separate. Lisa Marie now understood that separation had been intentional. These letters were proof that some stories were hidden not because they were shameful, but because they were too easily misunderstood. The world would have turned them into spectacle. Elvis had chosen silence instead. As she continued reading, the emotional undercurrent deepened. Marilyn wrote about the way people spoke to her as if she were a child, even when she was the most recognizable woman in the room. She described the strange loneliness of being desired but not protected, admired but not believed. Her words carried a kind of fatigue Lisa Marie recognized instantly, the same weariness she had felt watching her father retreat inward as the years passed. Fame, Marilyn wrote, was not a shield, it was exposure. Elvis, it seemed, had known that too. Lisa Marie paused at a paragraph where Marilyn mentioned his voice, not his singing voice, but the one he used when he stopped performing. She wrote that it was softer then, less certain, as if he was always measuring how much of himself he could safely reveal. That line stayed with Lisa Marie longer than the rest. It confirmed something she had always sensed but never been able to articulate. Her father had been careful with his inner life, not because he lacked depth, but because depth, once exposed, could be exploited. Marilyn had recognized that instinct in him, just as he had recognized her fragility behind the image. The second letter contained a shift from observation to confession. Marilyn wrote about pressure, not from one source, but from all directions at once.
Studios, public expectations, private fears. She admitted that she sometimes felt like a character trapped inside her own body, forced to smile through scenes she did not write. There was a line Lisa Marie read twice, then a third time, before letting it sink in. Marilyn wrote that Elvis was one of the few people who did not ask her to be Marilyn Monroe. He allowed her to be something quieter, something less defined. That alone explained the emotional gravity of the letters. They were not evidence of scandal. They were evidence of refuge. Lisa Marie's thoughts drifted to the world outside Graceland, to how quickly these words would be stripped of nuance if they ever became public. She could already imagine the headlines, the speculation, the simplified narratives. But the letters resisted that kind of reduction. They were layered, cautious, emotionally complex. Marilyn did not write as someone seeking attention. She wrote as someone seeking understanding. Elvis, by preserving these letters without responding publicly or exploiting them, had honored that request in the only way he knew how. Silence, in this case, had been an act of care. The more Lisa Marie read, the clearer the unspoken agreement between them became. Marilyn wrote as if she trusted Elvis to hold her words safely, without judgment or exposure. There were no demands, no expectations attached, only the implicit understanding that these letters were a space where honesty could exist without consequence. That kind of space is rare even in ordinary lives. For people whose faces were known worldwide, it was nearly impossible. Lisa Marie felt the weight of that responsibility now pressing against her own chest. She had inherited not just the letters, but the choice her father had once made, to protect a truth or release it into a world that rarely handled truth gently. One passage stood out more than the others. Marilyn described a moment when she realized that being adored did not mean being understood. The realization, she wrote, came quietly, not in the middle of chaos, but in the stillness afterward. Lisa Marie closed her eyes, hearing echoes of her own life in those words. The parallels between her father and Marilyn no longer felt coincidental. They felt inevitable. Two people shaped by admiration, slowly hollowed by it, reaching toward each other not for escape, but for recognition. By the time Lisa Marie reached the end of the final letter again, she understood that what she held was not just a private exchange between two legends. It was a fragment of emotional history that challenged the version of them the world had accepted. These letters complicated their stories in ways that could never be fully resolved, and perhaps that was why they had been hidden. Not because they revealed too much, but because they revealed something the public had never learned how to see: vulnerability without spectacle, connection without performance. As she carefully placed the letters back into the box once more, Lisa Marie knew that the discovery had already changed the narrative, even if no one else ever read a single word. The connection between Elvis and Marilyn was no longer hypothetical. It was written, preserved, and now understood. What remained uncertain was whether the world was capable of understanding it too. And that question, heavy and unresolved, followed her as she finally stood and left the room, carrying with her a truth that history itself had never fully acknowledged.
Time behaved strangely after that. Days passed, yet Lisa Marie felt as if she were still seated on the floor of that sealed room, the letters open in her hands, their weight pressing against her thoughts. She carried them with her now, not physically, but emotionally, each line resurfacing at unexpected moments. It was not the idea of Elvis and Marilyn that haunted her. It was the tone of Marilyn's words, the restraint, the fear carefully folded between sentences. There was something unfinished there, something unresolved that demanded attention. Lisa Marie returned to the box again, knowing that she could no longer read the letters passively. This time, she searched for what was not said. The hidden confession did not announce itself. It emerged gradually, through repetition and omission. Marilyn wrote often about being watched, about sensing that her privacy was an illusion. She described rooms that felt crowded even when empty, and conversations that left her more guarded than before. At first glance, these passages could be dismissed as anxiety, the natural consequence of fame. But read together, they formed a pattern. Marilyn was afraid, not in a general sense, but in a specific, persistent way. She trusted Elvis with this fear because she believed he understood what it meant to feel exposed without consent. Lisa Marie felt a chill as she realized that this fear was not metaphorical. It was grounded in experience. One letter, dated only by context, shifted everything. Marilyn wrote of a moment when she realized she was no longer in control of her own narrative. She hinted at pressures that came not just from studios or public expectations, but from individuals who believed her silence could be purchased. The wording was careful, almost cautious, as if she feared even the page itself might betray her. She wrote that Elvis had listened without interrupting, without offering solutions. His presence, she implied, was enough. Lisa Marie read the paragraph several times, her mind filling in the spaces between the words. This was the confession, not of a scandalous relationship, but of vulnerability under threat. As she continued, the emotional gravity intensified. Marilyn wrote about trust as a finite resource, one she felt slipping away. She spoke of exhaustion, a feeling that the version of herself the world adored was slowly replacing the person she actually was. There was a line that stopped Lisa Marie cold. Marilyn wrote that she feared becoming manageable. The word lingered, sharp and unsettling. It suggested a loss of agency, a quiet surrender to forces that preferred compliance over humanity. Lisa Marie thought of her father, of how often he had pushed back against expectations, only to be met with resistance disguised as concern. The parallels were impossible to ignore. The confession reached its most explicit form near the end of the letter. Marilyn did not name names. She did not describe events in detail. Instead, she acknowledged a truth that felt heavier than specifics. She wrote that she no longer trusted the people who claimed to protect her. That realization, she admitted, had come too late. Lisa Marie lowered the letter, her hands unsteady. This was not a revelation meant for the public. It was a warning, shared in confidence. Elvis had been the keeper of that warning, carrying it silently in a world that celebrated Marilyn's image while ignoring her fear. Direct narration. Lisa Marie's understanding of her father shifted in that moment. She had always known Elvis as a man burdened by responsibilities he never asked for, but she now saw a different dimension of that burden. By holding these letters, he had accepted the weight of Marilyn's truth without attempting to reshape it. He had not turned it into a story, had not sought validation or sympathy. He had simply kept it safe. That choice, Lisa Marie realized, had come at a cost. Silence can protect, but it can also isolate. Her father had chosen isolation rather than betrayal. The letters also revealed Marilyn's awareness of her own vulnerability. She wrote that she feared being remembered incorrectly, reduced to an image stripped of context and complexity. She worried that the world would never understand the cost of being constantly visible. Lisa Marie felt a deep ache as she recognized how accurately that fear had been realized. Marilyn Monroe had become an icon, but the woman behind the icon had been lost in the process. These letters were an attempt to resist that erasure, to leave behind evidence of a more complete self, even if only one person ever saw it. Lisa Marie wondered if Elvis had ever considered sharing the letters, even privately, with someone who might have understood, or if he had known instinctively that doing so would fracture the fragile trust Marilyn had placed in him. The letters offered no answers, only a reflection of the responsibility he had accepted. They were not a request for rescue. They were an acknowledgement of reality. That distinction mattered. Marilyn was not asking Elvis to save her. She was asking him to see her. And in that, he had succeeded. As Lisa Marie placed the letter back into its envelope, she felt the quiet gravity of what had been entrusted to her. The hidden confession was not a single sentence or revelation. It was the cumulative weight of Marilyn's fear, honesty, and diminishing sense of safety. By discovering these letters, Lisa Marie had become the next keeper of that truth. The question was no longer whether the confession existed. It was whether it should remain hidden, protected as it had been for decades, or finally acknowledged in a world that still struggled to listen when women spoke of fear without spectacle. The room felt smaller now, not because of confinement, but because of responsibility. Lisa Marie understood that the letters had not been waiting to be found. They had been waiting to be understood. And understanding, she knew, demanded more than curiosity. It demanded restraint, empathy, and a willingness to sit with discomfort. The confession had survived in silence for a reason. Whether that silence would continue was a decision she could no longer avoid. Lisa Marie did not rush to a decision. That, she felt, would have betrayed the care with which the letters had been written and preserved. Instead, she let them exist alongside her daily life, a quiet presence that altered the way she saw her father's past and her own inheritance. The letters were no longer just documents. They were a responsibility that followed her into every room, every conversation. She began to understand why Elvis had never spoken of them. Some truths are not hidden because they are dangerous, but because revealing them too early can distort them beyond recognition. Elvis had lived in a world that consumed meaning and returned spectacle. He had chosen restraint. She thought often about the moment he must have decided to keep the letters where no one would look, not locked away with valuables, not cataloged among memorabilia, but hidden in a place defined by quiet. That choice suggested intention rather than fear. Elvis had understood the machinery of fame better than most. He knew that once a private truth entered the public domain, it would be pulled apart, simplified, and reassembled into something unrecognizable. Marilyn's words, written in vulnerability, would not survive that process intact. Protecting them meant protecting her. The letters also forced Lisa Marie to reconsider the timeline the world accepted so easily. Marilyn Monroe's final years had been narrated endlessly, but always from a distance, framed by speculation and hindsight. Reading her words stripped that distance away. There was no melodrama in her confessions, no theatrical despair. Instead, there was a steady awareness of risk, a quiet understanding that something fundamental had shifted in her life. She wrote as someone who sensed danger, not as a sudden event, but as a gradual tightening. Lisa Marie realized that this awareness had likely been invisible to those who preferred Marilyn as an image rather than a person. Elvis's role in this story remained largely silent, but that silence spoke volumes. He did not insert himself in Marilyn's narrative. He did not respond with advice or promises, at least none recorded here. His restraint suggested a deep respect for boundaries, something rarely afforded to Marilyn in her lifetime. Lisa Marie imagined her father reading these letters late at night, absorbing their weight without attempting to solve them. That kind of listening is rare, especially among men conditioned to fix rather than witness. It revealed a side of Elvis history had rarely acknowledged. As the days passed, Lisa Marie felt the tension between preservation and disclosure sharpen. On one hand, the letters represented a fuller, more humane understanding of both Elvis and Marilyn. On the other, releasing them risked repeating the very harm they documented. The public had changed, but not enough to guarantee compassion. She wondered whether the world was capable of holding this story without turning it into another spectacle. That question haunted her, because it mirrored the question Marilyn herself seemed to ask between the lines. Who could be trusted with the truth? Lisa Marie sought counsel, not from advisors or publicists, but from memory. She recalled moments with her father when he had withdrawn without explanation, when silence had settled between them like a barrier. She had once resented that silence, mistaking it for distance. Now she saw it differently. Silence had been his defense, his way of shielding what little remained untouched by the demands of fame. The letters fit that pattern. They were not an omission. They were an act of care. One letter in particular returned to her thoughts repeatedly. Marilyn wrote about being misunderstood, not because she failed to communicate, but people heard only what they wanted to hear. That line felt uncomfortably relevant. Lisa Marie knew that once the letters were known, interpretations would multiply. Some would search for scandal. Others would project their own fantasies on the connection between Elvis and Marilyn. Very few would sit with the discomfort of vulnerability without demanding resolution. The letters did not offer neat conclusions. They resisted them. The weight of that resistance became clear as Lisa Marie considered her own position. She was not just a witness to this history. She was its inheritor. Her name alone guaranteed attention, scrutiny, and expectation. Any choice she made would be interpreted through the lens of legacy. Protecting the letters could be seen as secrecy. Revealing them could be seen as exploitation. Neither option felt clean. That, she realized, was the cost of truth when it intersects with fame. There is no neutral ground. As she returned the letters to their place once more, Lisa Marie felt a quiet resolve take shape. The story they told did not belong to the world by default. It belonged first to the people who had lived it, and then to those capable of honoring it. That distinction mattered. Elvis had understood it instinctively. Marilyn had trusted him because of it. Now the responsibility rested with her. The question was no longer whether the letters should be known, but how and by whom. The house remained still, its walls heavy with memory. Outside, the world continued unchanged, unaware of the history resting just beyond its reach. Lisa Marie stood in that stillness and accepted a difficult truth of her own. Some stories are powerful not because they are revealed, but because they endure. Whether these letters would remain hidden or finally emerge, they had already fulfilled their purpose. They had restored humanity to two figures long stripped of it. And in doing so, they had changed the way Lisa Marie understood not only her father's legacy, but the fragile line between truth and protection. Lisa Marie understood something essential as she stood in that quiet wing of the house for the last time. The story was no longer about discovery. Discovery was easy. Anyone could open a box, read a page, feel shock. What mattered now was consequence. The letters had survived because they were protected from appetite, from the hunger of an audience that demanded answers without patience, closure without care. If these words were ever to exist beyond the room that held them, they would need a frame strong enough to resist distortion. That realization sharpened her resolve. This could not become another legend scavenged for fragments. If it moved forward, it would do so deliberately, on her terms, or not at all. She began by reading the letters once more, not as a daughter, not as a guardian, but as a witness. This time she focused on structure rather than emotion, on what Marilyn revealed and what she withheld. The pattern was unmistakable. Marilyn never asked to be saved. She never dramatized her fear. She documented it, carefully, almost clinically, as if she knew one day someone might need to understand without sensationalism. Elvis's role in that documentation was passive but profound. He was not the subject of the letters. He was their anchor, the person Marilyn trusted to hold truth without reshaping it. That trust, Lisa Marie realized, was the core of the story. Not romance, not scandal, trust. The danger lay in how easily that core could be buried beneath speculation. Lisa Marie had lived long enough under public scrutiny to know how narratives mutated once released. Details were exaggerated. Silences were filled with assumption. Context was treated as optional. If she allowed the letters to emerge as raw artifacts, they would be consumed, argued over, and reduced to headlines within days. The truth they carried would be lost in the noise they were meant to escape. That could not happen. Not again. Not to Marilyn. So Lisa Marie made a choice that surprised even herself. She decided the letters would not speak alone. They would be accompanied by context, by restraint, by an insistence on listening rather than reacting. The story, if told, would be framed as what it truly was, a record of vulnerability between two people overwhelmed by visibility. She would not release the words wholesale. She would guide their interpretation, not to control the narrative, but to protect its integrity. It was the same choice her father had made, adapted for a world that demanded transparency without responsibility. This decision brought no immediate relief. If anything, it intensified the pressure. There would be resistance. There would be accusations of withholding, of shaping truth to suit legacy. Lisa Marie accepted that. She had learned early that doing the right thing rarely aligned with public approval. The letters had waited decades because timing mattered. Releasing them without preparation would be an act of impatience, not honesty. And patience, she felt, was the only way to honor what Marilyn had entrusted to her father and what her father had entrusted to her. In the weeks that followed, Lisa Marie began assembling a framework quietly, without announcements or expectation. She revisited archival material, interviews, timelines, not to prove anything, but to prevent misinterpretation. She wanted the letters to exist within reality, not myth. Marilyn's words did not need embellishment, they needed grounding. The more she worked, the clearer it became that the letters altered familiar histories in subtle but irreversible ways. They did not rewrite Elvis or Marilyn, they deepened them. They replaced caricature with complexity, silence with intention. There was one moment, late one evening, when Lisa Marie paused mid-sentence while reviewing her notes. She realized that the letters had already accomplished something rare. They had reclaimed Marilyn's voice without demanding that it performed. They had revealed Elvis's capacity for restraint in a culture that rewarded excess. And they had forced Lisa Marie to confront the inherited burden of legacy, not as something to preserve blindly, but as something to steward thoughtfully. That understanding steadied her. The fear of backlash diminished, the importance of accuracy grew. The final decision came not with ceremony, but with clarity. Lisa Marie resolved that the letters would be acknowledged, not exploited. Portions would be shared when and if they could be understood. The full truth would remain protected until protection was no longer necessary. This was not censorship, it was guardianship. The world had not been kind to either of the people who wrote and received those letters. It had taken their images and discarded their interior lives. This time, Lisa Marie would not allow that cycle to repeat. When she returned the box to its place for the last time, she did so without hesitation. The letters were no longer hidden out of fear. They were held in reserve out of respect. The story they told was now alive in her, integrated into her understanding of her father and the woman history had flattened into an icon. That integration mattered more than exposure. It ensured the letters would not be reduced to evidence or rumor. They would remain what they had always been, testimony.
Outside, Graceland continued its routines. Visitors came and went, cameras flashed, myths were reenacted daily. None of that touched the quiet shift that had occurred within its walls. Lisa Marie stepped into that world, carrying a truth refined by patience. She knew that when the letters eventually emerged, they would do so not as a shock, but as a correction, not as a spectacle, but as a reckoning. The secret had never been the letters themselves. It was the care with which they had been held. Elvis had understood that. Marilyn had trusted it. Now Lisa Marie had chosen to continue it. In a culture obsessed with revelation, restraint had become the most radical act of all. And in that restraint, the hidden confession found its final form, not exposed, not erased, but honored.